The twin suns of Threshold 7 hung heavy in the pale sky, baking the rocky ground until heat waves shimmered across the horizon. Jake Miller wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, squinting against the harsh light. His boots crunched over loose gravel as he made his way through the outskirts of the human settlement, a collection of prefab buildings and sealed domes that looked tiny against the vast alien landscape. The air here had a strange taste. Bitter. Almost metallic. Like licking old coins. Jake had stopped noticing it most days, but out here, away from the colony's air scrubbers, it hit harder. This world was nothing like Earth, with its soft rain and gentle breezes. Threshold 7 was rough, unforgiving, and every breath reminded you that humans weren't meant to be here. But Jake didn't mind. Not really. As the colony's xenobiologist, he'd signed up for harsh environments and weird creatures. That was the job. That was the dream, actually. Studying alien life on a frontier world, far from the politics and crowds of the core systems. Just him, his equipment, and whatever strange things this planet had to offer. He crouched down near a cluster of purple-tinged rocks, pulling out his sample kit. The soil here was different from yesterday's collection site. More crystalline. Maybe higher mineral content. He'd need to run it through the analyzer back at the lab. That's when he heard it. A sound. Faint. Almost lost in the constant howl of wind that swept across the industrial sector. But it was there. A wheeze. Wet and desperate. The sound of something struggling to breathe. Jake's hand froze halfway to his sample container. He held his breath, listening. There it was again. Weaker this time. He stood slowly, his scanner hanging forgotten in his other hand. His eyes swept the area. Nothing but rocks, rust-colored dirt, and the skeletal remains of old mining equipment. And trash. Lots of trash. This was the dumping zone, where the colony had been pouring chemical waste for years before the Environmental Committee finally put their foot down. Nothing lived out here. Nothing could. The ground was poisoned, saturated with industrial runoff that would kill most organic life within hours. The warning signs made that pretty clear. Big yellow markers with skulls and all sorts of dire predictions about exposure. But something was making that sound. Jake picked his way carefully through the debris, past rusted containers leaking unknown fluids, past piles of discarded machinery parts. The sound grew slightly louder. More desperate. He rounded a twisted piece of metal scaffolding and stopped. Between two large rocks, almost invisible against the rust-stained ground, something moved. It was small. Really small. About the size of a house cat, maybe a bit smaller. Reptilian, definitely. Its body was covered in scales that might have been pretty once but were now a mottled, sickly brown. Dull. Lifeless. Like something dying. And it was dying. Jake could see that immediately. The creature's sides heaved with each breath, ribs visible through thin skin. A clear fluid dripped from its narrow snout. Its body trembled, not from cold but from the sheer effort of staying alive. Small wounds covered its hide, raw and angry. Chemical burns, probably. The toxic waste had done a number on it. "Hey there," Jake said softly, dropping to his knees. He set his equipment down carefully, not wanting to startle the creature. "Hey, little one. What happened to you?" He leaned closer, studying it with a scientist's eye. The scale pattern was unusual. Intricate. Too intricate, actually. Most animals had random patterns, evolutionary camouflage or sexual display features. But this looked different. The scales formed designs that seemed almost intentional, like someone had painted them on. Swirls and geometric shapes that continued across the creature's body. That was strange. Really strange. The creature's eyes opened. Slowly, as if even that small movement took enormous effort. Jake sucked in a breath. Golden. Bright, brilliant gold like polished metal catching sunlight. And intelligent. God, were they intelligent. This wasn't the blank stare of a simple animal. These eyes tracked him, studied him, evaluated him. Even through obvious pain and exhaustion, there was something aware behind that gaze. Something that understood. His hand moved instinctively toward his comm unit. Standard protocol was clear. Unknown species? Reported immediately. Get authorization before making contact. Let the proper channels handle it. That's what the manual said. That's what his training said. His finger hovered over the call button. The creature wheezed again. A horrible rattling sound that seemed to come from deep in its chest. Its body convulsed slightly, and those golden eyes squeezed shut in pain. Jake looked at the comm unit. Then at the creature. Then back at the comm unit. Protocol meant calling the research center. Which meant filing a report. Which meant waiting for authorization. Which meant committee meetings and approval processes. which meant hours, maybe days, of bureaucratic nonsense while this thing suffered. While it died. The creature trembled again, and another thin stream of fluid leaked from its nostrils. Jake put the comm unit away. Okay, he muttered, already shrugging out of his jacket. Okay, we're doing this. Protocol can wait. He reached out slowly, giving the creature time to see his hands, to understand he wasn't a threat. It watched him with those impossibly bright eyes but didn't have the strength to pull away. Jake wrapped his jacket around the small body as gently as he could. The creature was light. Too light. He could feel every bone through the fabric. When had it last eaten? How long had it been out here, slowly dying in the poison and heat? I've got you now, Jake whispered, cradling the bundle against his chest. He could feel a heartbeat. Rapid and weak like a bird's. But there. Still fighting. Let's get you somewhere safe. 3 weeks had passed since that day in the wasteland, and Jake could barely believe the change. The creature that had been half dead in his arms was now thriving, and watching her recover had become the best part of his days. He'd named her Ember. The name just felt right. Partly because of the faint orange glow that had started appearing in her scales, like embers in a dying fire coming back to life. But also because of her personality. She had this spark to her, this energy that reminded him of flames dancing. Unpredictable, warm, and full of life. The transformation was incredible. Those dull, cracked scales that had looked like dried mud? Gone. Replaced by healthy ones that caught the light in ways that made Jake stop and stare sometimes. When she moved under the lab lights, hints of crimson and gold would flash across her hide. Beautiful. Really beautiful. He'd never seen anything like it in any of the native species documentation. All right, Ember. Let's see how smart you really are, Jake said, setting up another puzzle on his workbench. He held up a piece of synthesized protein, the kind she'd gone crazy for yesterday. Her favorite treat. Ember's head snapped up from where she'd been lounging. Those golden eyes locked onto the food with laser focus. Jake placed the treat inside a small clear box. There was a lever on the side that, when pressed, would slide open a door. Simple mechanism. But it required understanding cause and effect. Problem solving. He'd been testing her intelligence for the past week, and every day she surprised him. Come on, girl. Figure it out. Ember hopped down from her heating pad and approached the puzzle. She tilted her head, studying it. First from the left. Then from the right. Then she walked around to look at it from behind. Jake could almost see her thinking, processing, analyzing. This wasn't animal behavior. This was something else. With a soft chirp that sounded almost triumphant, Ember reached out with one clawed foot and deliberately pressed the lever. The door slid open smoothly. She snatched the treat and made a sound that Jake swore was satisfaction. You're showing off now, aren't you? Jake laughed, reaching over to scratch behind what he'd figured out were her ear ridges. She leaned into his touch immediately, and that rumbling purr started up. It vibrated through his fingers, warm and content. You loved that sound. It meant she was happy. Safe. Healing. His comm unit buzzed on the table, breaking the moment. Jake glanced at the screen and felt his stomach drop. Message from Dr. Rebecca Hayes, the station's chief administrator. His boss, technically. The message was short and not particularly friendly. Miller, we need to talk about your pet project. My office. Now. Jake read it twice. The word now didn't leave much room for interpretation. Well, that's not good, he muttered. Ember chirped questioningly, sensing his mood shift. Nothing for you to worry about, girl. I just need to go deal with some adult human stuff. He stood, grabbed his jacket and looked back at Ember. She'd already curled up on his spare chair, the one he kept meaning to fix but never did. She'd claimed it as her own spot within the first week. From there, she could see his entire workspace, watch everything he did. She liked being close. Stay here and be good, okay? I'll be back soon. Ember made a soft sound, almost like acknowledgement, and closed her eyes. The walk to the administrative building felt longer than usual. Jake's mind raced. How had Rebecca found out? He'd been so careful. Well, relatively careful. Okay, he'd been walking around with Ember on his shoulder yesterday, but that was just to the market. Nobody had seemed to care. Rebecca's office was on the 3rd floor of the ugliest building in the colony. Squat, gray, and utterly charmless. The kind of place designed by committee to be as uninspiring as possible. He knocked on the door. Come in. Rebecca sat behind her desk, hands folded, expression neutral. That was never a good sign. When Rebecca was happy, you knew it. When she was angry, you really knew it. But neutral? That meant she was in full administrator mode. Jake. Sit down. He sat. The chair squeaked. So, Rebecca began, her voice measured and professional. "I've been hearing some very interesting rumors lately. Rumors about a certain xenobiologist keeping an unregistered alien creature in his personal quarters. Care to explain that to me?" Jake opened his mouth, then closed it. Then tried again. "She was dying, Rebecca. You should have seen her. The toxic waste had." "I know where you found her," Rebecca cut him off, but not unkindly. "I pulled the location data from your equipment logs. What I want to know is why you've been treating her for 3 weeks without proper clearance, without notifying the Xenobiology Committee, and without filing a single damn report." "I was going to file? When? After she died of old age?" Rebecca sighed and rubbed her temples. "Look, Jake, I get it. I do. But there are procedures for this kind of thing." "Procedures that would have killed her," Jake said quietly. "You know how long committee approval takes. She would have been dead before the first meeting even got scheduled." Rebecca didn't argue. They both knew he was right. "Okay, fine. But we have a bigger problem now." She leaned forward, and for the first time, Jake saw something else in her expression. Confusion. Maybe concern. "The SSK Wrath merchants have been asking questions. Lots of questions. About you specifically." "About me? Why?" "That's what I'd like to know. They keep asking if you found anything unusual. If you're keeping something. And Jake, this is the weird part." She paused, choosing her words carefully. 3 different SSK Wrath traders have tried to give you gifts this week. Expensive ones. Jewelry, rare metals, processed foods. They're treating you like you're someone important." Jake frowned, genuinely confused. "I don't understand. I barely talk to them. I buy supplies sometimes, but that's it." "Yeah, well, that's what I thought too. Until I decided to check the security footage." Rebecca spun her monitor around so Jake could see the screen. The video showed the market district yesterday. Jake recognized himself immediately, walking through the narrow lanes between vendors' stalls. And there, perched on his shoulder like she belonged there, was Ember. But it wasn't Jake that made his breath catch. It was everyone else. In the video, every single SSK Wrath he passed reacted. Their heads bowed. Their scales shifted colors, rippling with patterns Jake had never seen before. Some stepped back, pressing themselves against their stalls. Others stood completely still, as if frozen. They weren't looking at him. They were looking at Ember. "You see it?" Rebecca asked quietly. "Yeah," Jake breathed. "I see it. Jake, the SSK Wrath barely acknowledge humans on a good day. They trade with us because it's profitable, but that's it. They don't bow. They don't move out of the way. And they sure as hell don't act like that." She leaned back in her chair, studying him. "So I'm going to ask you one more time. What exactly did you find out there in that wasteland?" Jake looked at the frozen image on the screen. Ember's scales gleaming gold and crimson. The SSK Wrath bowing. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I think we're about to find out." The next 2 days were absolute chaos. Pure, unfiltered chaos. Jake had lived through colony emergencies before. Power outages. Atmospheric breaches. Even a small meteor strike that had everyone running for the shelters. But nothing compared to the pandemonium of preparing for the arrival of an alien empress. The entire station knew now. Empress Kaima herself was coming to Threshold 7. The ruler of the SSK Wrath Empire. And Jake Miller, humble xenobiologist who just wanted to study soil samples in peace, was somehow at the center of it all. They'd moved him out of his quarters within hours of Rebecca's meeting. Security teams had shown up with boxes and instructions, relocating him to what they called secure accommodations. The new place was bigger, sure. Better protected, definitely. High-tech locks, reinforced walls, guards posted outside. But Jake hated it. Too clean. Too sterile. He missed his cluttered little lab with its organized chaos and the smell of coffee that never quite left the air. Ember hadn't left his side since everything had been revealed. Not once. Before, she'd been content to explore, to investigate corners of his lab, to occasionally wander to her heating pad for a nap. Now, she stuck to him like glue. When he sat, she was in his lap. When he stood, she climbed to his shoulder. When he tried to take a shower, she sat outside the bathroom door and made worried sounds until he came back out. And she'd gotten protective. Really protective. Anytime an unfamiliar SSK Wrath approached, even the diplomats trying to help, she'd tense up. Her scales would shift to darker colors, and this soft hissing sound would come from her throat. A warning. Stay back. You know you're supposed to be royalty, right? Jake muttered during yet another mind-numbing security briefing. Ember was curled in his lap, her tail wrapped around his wrist possessively. Shouldn't I be the one protecting you? That's kind of the whole point of this mess. Ember made a sound that was half chirp, half snort. She settled more firmly against him, making her position clear. She was protecting him, and that was final. No arguments. Jake couldn't help but smile despite everything. High Diplomat Theron had appointed himself Jake's personal instructor in SSK Wrath Court Protocol. The old alien was patient, Jake had to give him that. But the lessons themselves were driving Jake slowly insane. You must not look the Empress directly in the eyes unless she addresses you first, Theron explained for the third time that morning. To do so would be considered a challenge to her authority. But how do I know if she's addressing me if I'm not looking at her? Jake asked, genuinely confused. You will know. Trust me, you will know. And I can't speak unless spoken to? Correct. What if there's an emergency? Then you may speak, but you must request permission first by bowing and waiting for acknowledgement. Yeah, I got it. Jake rubbed his face with both hands. This is insane. I'm a xenobiologist, not a diplomat. I don't know how to do any of this. Theron's scales shifted to a softer color, something Jake had learned indicated sympathy. You are the one who saved a princess, Jake Miller. That makes you many things now, whether you wish it or not. Diplomat. Guardian. Hero to some. I'm not a hero. I just helped someone who needed it. That, Theron said quietly, is precisely what makes you one. The protocol lessons continued. Don't touch a member of the royal family without permission. Don't turn your back on the Empress. Don't contradict her in public. Don't this, don't that, don't the other thing. Theron had looked pointedly at Ember when explaining the no-touching rule. She'd looked right back at him and deliberately pressed closer to Jake. Message received and ignored. Rebecca was dealing with her own nightmare. Coordinating with SSK Wrath officials to prepare landing protocols for the royal fleet. Every conversation seemed to bring new requirements, new security measures, new protocols. They're bringing an army, Rebecca had told Jake during a brief break. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. The Empress's personal guard, plus 3 cruisers worth of soldiers. Partly for ceremony, they say. But mostly for protection. Protection from what? Jake had asked, though he already knew the answer. From whoever tried to kill your little friend the first time. That was the shadow hanging over everything. The conspirators. Unknown. Unidentified. Still out there somewhere. Theron had confided to Jake during one lesson that the investigation had gone nowhere. Someone high up, the diplomat had said, his voice low. Someone with access to Princess SS Ratha's itinerary. Someone who could arrange an attack on a royal convoy and leave no evidence, no traces, no witnesses. We have suspects, of course. Nobles who oppose closer relations with humanity. Politicians who see the princess's survival as inconvenient to their plans. But no proof. Nothing concrete. So they might try again, Jake had said. Theron hadn't needed to answer. His expression said everything. The morning of the third day arrived too quickly. Jake had barely slept, his mind racing with all the things that could go wrong. What if he offended the Empress? What if Ember reacted badly to seeing her mother? What if the conspirators made another attempt? He was standing at the window of his new quarters, watching the sky lighten when he saw them. The royal fleet. Emerging from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Threshold 7 system. Even from the surface, from millions of miles away, Jake could see them. Bright points of light appearing in the dawn sky. One after another. Small stars being born against the fading darkness. She's really coming, Jake whispered. Ember chirped softly from his shoulder. Her scales were brilliant now, shimmering with colors Jake was sure hadn't been there a week ago. Crimson and gold, bright enough to glow faintly in the dim room. Someone knocked on his door. A voice called out. Mr. Miller? It's time. The Empress's shuttle will be landing in 1 hour. We need to get you to the landing pad. Jake took a deep breath. 1 hour. 60 minutes until his life changed forever. Again. He looked at Ember. She looked back at him with those impossibly intelligent golden eyes. Well, he said, trying to sound braver than he felt. I guess there's no backing out now. Ember head butted his cheek gently. He chose to interpret that as encouragement. Outside, the station was a flurry of activity. Humans and SSK Wrath working together to prepare for the arrival of their Empress. Banners being hung. Honor guards practicing their formations. Diplomats doing whatever diplomats did at the last minute. And Jake Miller, xenobiologist, walked through it all with a princess on his shoulder, heading toward a meeting that would change everything. The ships grew brighter in the morning sky. Coming closer. Coming home. It was time. Jake woke slowly, his mind foggy and confused. The first thing he registered was sound. Machines humming softly nearby, beeping at regular intervals. The low murmur of voices in the distance. The second thing he noticed was the smell. Antiseptic. Strong and chemical. The sharp, clean scent of a medical facility. Then came the pain. His chest felt like someone had taken a plasma torch to it and really gone to town. Every breath sent fire lancing through his ribs. Even the simple act of existing hurt in ways he'd never experienced before. Easy there, hero. A familiar voice cut through the haze. Don't try to move. Jake's eyes focused slowly. Rebecca leaned over him, her face hovering into view. She looked terrible, he thought distantly. Dark circles under her eyes. Hair pulled back messily. Lines of worry etched deep around her mouth. Don't try to move, she repeated, and her hand gently pressed against his shoulder when he instinctively tried to sit up. The doctors say you're lucky to be alive. Personally, I think lucky is a stretch, but you are alive, so I guess they're technically correct. Jake's mouth felt like sandpaper. He tried to speak, and what came out was barely a croak. Ember? For a moment, Rebecca didn't understand. Then her expression softened. Is this Ratha? She's safe, Jake. She's right here. Rebecca stepped to the side, and Jake's eyes found what he'd been desperately searching for. There, curled up on a chair that had been pulled right up next to his medical bed, was Ember. Ratha. Whatever her name was supposed to be. She looked small on that chair. Vulnerable. Her scales had lost some of their brilliant shine, dulled by stress and worry. Her tail was wrapped tightly around herself, and her eyes were fixed on him with an intensity that made his heart ache. The moment she saw he was awake, really awake and looking at her, everything changed. She uncoiled like a spring and launched herself onto the bed. Medical equipment beeped in protest, but she didn't care. She pressed against his side, careful to avoid his bandaged chest, and made soft sounds. Worried sounds. Checking sounds. Hey girl, Jake whispered, and even talking hurt. He managed a weak smile anyway. I'm okay. I'm all right. Ratha made a sound that was half chirp, half sob. You took a direct hit from a military-grade pulse weapon, Rebecca said, and her voice had gone flat. Professional. The tone she used when she was trying not to show emotion. Point-blank range. Full power. Jake, you should be dead. You should be a pile of ash on that landing pad. Jake's memories were coming back now, filtering through the fog of pain medication. The landing pad. The Empress appearing from her shuttle. The moment of joy when SS Ratha had reunited with her mother. And then the flash of light. The warning shout. The weapon fire lancing down from orbit. Aimed at SS Ratha. He'd moved without thinking. Just grabbed her and turned, putting his body between the blast and the small creature on his shoulder. Then pain. Then darkness. The only reason you're breathing right now, Rebecca continued, is because the Empress's personal physician worked on you for 6 straight hours. Apparently, SSK Rath medical technology is pretty advanced. Who knew? What happened? Jake managed to ask. He tried to sit up and instantly regretted it. Pain exploded through his chest, white-hot and all-consuming. Lie down, you idiot. Rebecca's hands were back on his shoulders, firm but gentle, pushing him back against the pillows. You've got burns through 3 layers of tissue, your ribs are cracked, and your nervous system is still recovering from electrical shock. Moving is a bad idea. Jake settled back, breathing carefully. SS Ratha pressed closer, as if she could will him to heal faster through sheer proximity. Someone hacked the orbital defense network, Rebecca explained, her voice tight with anger. They got control of one of the automated turrets. Had access for exactly 3 seconds. Just long enough to target and fire 1 shot. Her jaw clenched. They were aiming for SS Ratha. For a child. And you got in the way. Good, Jake said immediately without hesitation. His hand found SS Ratha's head, scratching gently behind her ear ridges. That's what I was supposed to do. SS Ratha made another sound, pressing even closer to him. He could feel her trembling slightly. The door to the medical room opened and Jake's attention shifted. High Diplomat Theron entered, flanked by 2 guards in full combat armor. The old diplomat looked like he'd aged a decade in the past few hours. His scales were dull, almost gray. His movements slow and heavy. Jake Miller, Theron said, and even his voice sounded tired. I'm glad to see you awake. The Empress requests your presence. When you are able to travel, of course. There is no rush. I'm able now, Jake said immediately. He started to sit up again, gritting his teeth against the pain. Jake, don't be stupid, Rebecca started. I'm not letting her wait, Jake interrupted, pushing through the screaming protest from his chest. Not after everything. He looked at Theron. How bad is it? The diplomat's expression darkened. We will discuss that with the Empress. Can you walk? I can walk. It was a lie, but Jake made it true through sheer stubbornness. Rebecca helped him stand, and SS Ratha stayed pressed against his side as if trying to physically hold him together. Each step was agony, but he kept moving. Theron led them through corridors that Jake barely recognized. The station had been transformed into a military installation overnight. SSK Wrath guards stood at every intersection, weapons ready. Jake spotted automated turrets, friendlies he hoped, tracking their movement. Blast shields had been deployed at key junctions. They weren't taking any more chances. The Empress had taken over the station's largest conference room. The civilian furniture had been removed, replaced with something that looked almost like a throne room. She sat at the head of a long table carved from dark metal, her purple scales somehow darker than before. Angrier. Around her stood SS Karath officials, nobles probably, all wearing expressions of barely contained rage. When Jake entered, every eye in the room turned to him. The weight of their attention was almost physical. Ratha tensed on his shoulder, and a low warning sound rumbled in her throat. Jake Miller, the Empress said. Her voice could have cut steel. Sure. Cold. Furious. You live. This pleases me greatly. She stood, unfolding to her full intimidating height, and walked toward him. Each step was precise, controlled, predatory. Jake had the distinct impression of being evaluated by something that could end him without effort. What you did was foolish, Kaima continued, stopping directly in front of him. Reckless. Completely illogical. You're not a soldier. Not trained for combat. Not equipped to intercept weapon fire. Jake lifted his chin, meeting her eyes despite the protocol lessons. She's a child. Someone had to protect her. She is a princess. One of the officials barked from behind the Empress. An older male, scales marked with military insignia. You are nothing. A human civilian with no training, no authority, no. Enough. The Empress's voice cracked like thunder. 6 months had passed since that chaotic day when the Empress arrived on Threshold 7, and Jake barely recognized the place anymore. He stood at the observation deck on the station's upper level, hands pressed against the cool glass, watching the world below transform. The view had changed so dramatically that sometimes he had to remind himself this was the same planet where he'd found Ember dying in toxic waste. Where poison had once scarred the landscape, where nothing could grow and everything died, green was appearing. Actual green. Native plants, carefully selected and cultivated by teams of botanists, now grew in soil that had been cleaned and remediated. The industrial sector, that nightmare of rusted metal and chemical runoff, had been completely redesigned. New environmental systems were in place, ones that prevented the kind of contamination that had nearly killed SS Ratha. It was beautiful, and more than a little overwhelming. Impressive, is it not? A familiar voice said from behind him. Jake turned to see High Diplomat Theron approaching. The old diplomat looked different these days. Healthier. His scales showed those relaxed color patterns that Jake had learned indicated contentment and peace. The stress that had lined his face during those first weeks had faded. All of this, Theron continued, gesturing to the view below, because one human could not walk past a dying creature. Because you acted when it would have been easier to do nothing. Jake shook his head. It's not just me, Theron. You know that. The engineering teams doing the actual work, the botanists, the environmental scientists, the laborers, they're the ones who made this happen. They were inspired by your example, Theron replied gently. They saw what one act of compassion accomplished, and they wanted to be part of something similar. Never underestimate the power of a simple choice, Jake Miller. Small actions can reshape entire worlds. Before Jake could respond, he heard a familiar sound behind them. Chittering. Excited and rapid. He turned with a smile already forming. Ratha was coming down the corridor and she wasn't alone. Rebecca walked beside her, along with 2 human children Jake had gotten to know over the past months. Olivia and Tyler, siblings whose parents worked in the station's hydroponics section. Ratha had changed too. She'd grown. A lot. She was now the size of a large dog, maybe bigger. Her scales had fully developed into that brilliant crimson and gold that marked her royal bloodline. Under the station lights, she practically glowed. But despite her size, despite her royal status, despite everything that had happened, she still preferred to be near Jake. She still tried to perch on his shoulder sometimes, though she was getting too big for that. Jake. Ratha called out. Her standard was nearly perfect now, fluent and clear with only a slight sibilant accent that gave away her reptilian nature. "Look who I found. Olivia and Tyler want to see the gardens. Can we take them? Please?" The two children bounced excitedly. Olivia, the younger one at 7, was practically vibrating with energy. Tyler, 9 and trying to act more mature, couldn't quite hide his enthusiasm either. Rebecca rolled her eyes, but Jake could see the affection in the gesture. "I keep telling them they should ask me, not you. I'm the one who's supposed to approve field trips. But apparently you're the cool adult now. We want to see the purple flowers." Olivia burst out. "The ones that glow in the dark." Tisratha said they smell like vanilla. "And the crystal formations," Tyler added, trying to sound more scientific. Tisratha says they make sounds if you touch them the right way. "Like music. Is that really true?" Jake looked at Tisratha, who chirped innocently. She'd been filling the kids' heads with stories about the gardens for weeks now. "All right," Jake said, unable to resist their excitement. "Let's go. But you two need to stay close and listen to the guides, okay? Some of the plants are still being studied and we don't want anyone getting hurt." "We promise," they chorused together. The group made their way through the station toward what had become known as the Reconciliation Gardens. The name had stuck after someone proposed it in a station meeting. It was more than just environmental cleanup. It was a symbol. A joint project between human and SSK Wrath scientists, botanists and engineers. A showcase of what could happen when two species stopped being suspicious and started working together. As they walked, Jake found himself observing the station around him with fresh eyes. The changes weren't just physical. They were social, cultural. In the market district, human children played alongside young SSK Wrath without fear or hesitation. They'd invented some kind of game that involved running and tagging, and nobody seemed to care about species differences. They were just kids being kids. Merchants from both species shared stalls now. A human selling textiles next to a SSK Wrath offering spices. They chatted between customers, laughing at shared jokes, helping each other during rush periods. There were still problems, sure. Cultural misunderstandings happened regularly. Just last week, a human had accidentally insulted a SSK Wrath elder by using the wrong hand gesture. And there were still people on both sides who harbored prejudices, who didn't like the changes. But the outright hostility that had defined human SSK Wrath relations? That had faded. People were trying. That's what mattered. "You did this," Theron said quietly, following Jake's gaze around the busy station corridors. "No," Jake started to protest. "Yes," Theron interrupted firmly. "Not alone, of course. But you started it. You showed us that compassion requires no protocol, no permission, no committee approval. Just action. Just caring." The old diplomat paused, watching Tisratha walk ahead with the children, explaining something enthusiastically. "The Empress has reformed 17 laws in the past 6 months. Old laws that prevented SSK Wrath from offering aid without proper authorization. Laws that valued procedure over life. Laws that would have let Tisratha die while we waited for permission to help her." "That's good," Jake said softly. "All because a human taught us that sometimes, the rules we create to protect ourselves become the very things that harm us." Theron's scales shifted to a deeper, more solemn color. "You gave us permission to be better, Jake Miller." They reached the gardens and the children immediately rushed toward the glowing flowers, their excited voices echoing off the dome. Tisratha followed at a more dignified pace, though her tail swished with barely contained excitement. Rebecca stood beside Jake, watching the children explore. "You know," she said conversationally, "when you first brought that creature into the station, I thought you'd lost your mind." Jake laughed. "You weren't wrong. But look what came of it." Rebecca gestured at the gardens, at the playing children, at the SSK Wrath and human families mingling peacefully nearby. "This is going to be in the history books, Jake. The turning point in human SSK Wrath relations. First contact went okay, but real cooperation? Real friendship? That started here. Because you couldn't walk past someone who needed help." "I was just doing what felt right," Jake said. "Exactly," Theron interjected gently. "You did what you believed anyone should do. And in doing so, you showed us all what we could become."